Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Rebecca Murphey. I am a JavaScript developer based out of Durham, North Carolina, working as an independent consultant. Woo, Durham. Woo, North Carolina. Not jet lagged anymore, thank God, but that took a couple days and a lot of drinking. So yeah, I want to talk about modern JavaScript today. And you might have seen a blog post that I wrote a couple of weeks ago about this, which is kind of in reaction to someone who wrote the blog about whether JavaScript was kind of about to follow in the footsteps of Perl and its sordid history and terrible misuse back in the day. And in the slide, in the blog post, the author, whose name I'm conveniently forgetting right now, linked to a slide deck about modern Perl and this effort in the Perl community to kind of try to rehabilitate Perl's image after terrible, terrible things were done with it in the 1990s and early 2000s. And it kind of resonated with me reading through it and reading through the evolution of Perl and how that community is trying to make up for past mistakes. And so I wrote a blog post and wanted to talk about it a little bit today at JSConf. But first, I kind of want to take us back to 1900-ish and talk about another community 110 years ago or so that decided to take charge of its destiny because the powers that be weren't making things happen fast enough for them. And they were people who they were kind of the hackers of the day. They were the developers of the day. This was Brendan Eich and Douglas Crockford and Alex Russell and some guy who's really, really tan. These were the hackers of the day, and they were automobile enthusiasts. These new horseless carriages were on the scene, and they saw tremendous potential in them, both as a means of entertainment and leisure and adventure, and also as a means of making money. And these guys were working on some really hard problems at the time. They were working on problems like, how do we get a light to shine off the front of a car? And they were working on problems like, actually, how do we build electric cars? Any day now, those batteries will be small enough that we can make them fit. And so these were the important problems of the day, and they were working really hard to solve them. In 1903, this guy named Horatio Nelson Jackson was the first person to drive a car across the country. This is about what it looked like, and it took him 63 days to get from probably New York to San Francisco or thereabouts. And this is a big deal. This was a thing that, like, there were guidebooks about how to do this. Like, this is an adventure. And you had to be really rich. I don't know if you saw in that first slide that one of these cars cost about $3,000, which in today's dollars is about $72,000. So you had to be rich, and you had to be adventurous, and you had to be kind of prepared for everything. In 1919, about 16 years later, the US military, fresh off winning World War I, helping win World War I, decided they were going to try the same thing. And this is about how it went, and not so well. And it took them, they cut down the time to 61 days to get across the country. And terrible, terrible things happened on this. Part of the reason was they were using fancy technology like solid wheels to try to get there. So in a guidebook from the time, the author said, you start out pretty much by the compass, finding or endeavoring to find the best road, if roads existed. You could not tell beforehand how long your trip would take or whether in reality you would ever reach your destination. And when I read this, I said, that sounds a lot like our lives right now in some ways. We are embarking on making JavaScript better and embarking on this adventure, but when we start out with a project, we don't know how long it's going to take to get where we need to go. We don't know whether we're ever going to get there at all necessarily. And this is especially true, I think, for, this is rare air that we are breathing in here. We are the best and brightest who flew our asses to Portland to come be here for 2 days and learn what we can. But I think this is especially a problem for the everyday users of the language that we're here to celebrate and learn about. So the bottom line was that getting anywhere in the early 1900s was completely a do-it-yourself affair. You really had to be up for adventure. There was very little help from the powers that be. The federal government didn't really buy into this whole roads thing quite yet. There were a lot of people who were lobbying for it, but time after time, people would try to get the federal government to pay for roads and to take this seriously, and they just weren't interested. Individual towns and counties and even states, their interest in solving these problems of infrastructure was all over the map. So you had states like Pennsylvania that were doing a really good job of embracing roads and paving them, and that this was important. And then you had states like New Mexico where that convoy got trapped in quicksand and almost didn't make it. So there were just huge uncertainties when you embarked on anything like this. The guidebooks offered advice about how to do it, but experience was really the only way that you could hope to make it across the country if you wanted to. And even the US military convoy in 1919 had to take a civilian pilot with them who had driven this road before, because they didn't trust that they could figure out how to do it themselves. So the bottom line problem was that people were trying to do things with these neat new things called automobiles, and the infrastructure simply didn't exist to actually pull it off. And so in 1912, this guy named Carl Fisher was out looking for some cider, probably got drunk, driving home in the dark in the rain. He gets lost, and he climbs he's an enterprising hacker, and so he climbs to the top of a pole, lights a match, hoping he's going to see a sign in the dark to tell him which way it is back to town, and instead he sees an ad for chewing tobacco. And he's really frustrated. This guy actually helped start the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Like, he was a big mover and shaker in the automobile world of the early 1900s. And he saw that this lack of infrastructure, this lack of a system, was limiting the ability for automobiles to become the thing that he wanted to see them become. And so from this moment, his life's work was born. He decided that he was going to build a highway across the country. And he said, let's build it before we're too old to enjoy it. And to be clear, when he was talking about building a highway, he was talking about building something that looked not unlike this. We're not talking like 4-lane interstates or 8-lane interstates with pavement and all that. He just wanted a clear way to get from one place to the other. And this was considered a fairly good road. This is actually a piece of the highway that was eventually built. I think this is in, I don't know, Nebraska or something like that. Looks like Nebraska, right? So this was considered a fairly good road. And this was all that he was aiming to do. Maybe pave some parts of it, but like just having a road exist. And like I said, the people in rural America weren't really interested in putting forth the effort to make this happen. They saw these $72,000 contraptions driving down their roads, scaring their horses, and they didn't understand why they should pay money to try to improve the situation. And so you had these enthusiasts, these evangelists, and they were having a really hard time connecting with the people that they needed to connect with in order to actually make this happen. So this is what they were after. This is about what they were working with at the time. And this was a road, nominally speaking. Some places it was even worse than this. Some places mountain passes were not even wide enough for these military trucks to go down. So this was what they were working with. And so Carl Fisher got in touch with the people of Goodyear and the people of Packard and the concrete companies and said, let's raise some money. The federal government's not going to do this for us. Let's raise some money. I think it'll take $10 million to build a road across the country. He was wrong. It cost a lot more than that to build 3,300 miles of road, even in 1912, 1913. But he organized the Lincoln Highway Association. And so Ben, know that L was not for loser, that L was the Lincoln Highway. He organized the Lincoln Highway Association. And like I said, the $10 million goal that they had wasn't realistic, and they had a hard time raising it anyway. And so they decided that they were going to kind of scale back their goals and make their goals things that they could achieve, make their goals things that were attainable, and that would help them move toward this reality of infrastructure that they wanted to see. And they decided they would choose a path, they would put up signs, and they would plant seedling miles. out in the country. And these seedling miles were interesting because what they did is, so I told you they had the concrete companies that they had partnered up with. The concrete companies, knowing that they would make a whole lot of money as soon as people started building roads, the concrete companies agreed to donate a mile of concrete. And in exchange, towns that accepted that mile of concrete would donate the labor or raise money for the labor to build 1 mile of road. And they would build this 1 mile of road out in the middle of nowhere. And people would drive over those terrible rutted roads to come to this 1 mile of pristine highway in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly, all the townspeople who didn't want their horses frightened started to realize this might not be such a bad idea after all, this whole highway thing. So this is where we come back to modern JavaScript and what I want to talk about today. We need to choose a path. We need to put up signs. And we need to plant these seedling miles. And this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think that means to JavaScript, but yeah, here we go. So the path was a key part of this. What was going on is you had all of these disjointed systems with no central authority trying to, just doing things in isolation. Roads went from one town to another, one county to another. Roads didn't go across states, and roads certainly didn't connect one state to another. And so this was part of the vision that these guys had, was that if we can say this is how you get from New York to San Francisco, then all of the services that need to emerge, all of the infrastructure that needs to emerge around this path will happen if we can just say this is the path. So without that path, it was only by investing tremendous effort that people could get from one place to another. And without this path, without knowing how you get from New York to San Francisco, without knowing how you structure a JavaScript application, without knowing how you do more than manipulate the DOM, people don't know what the heck to do. So a few things that I think that we need to do as a community to say this is the path. Number one, the core that all the libraries provide, DOM manipulation, AJAX, event binding, array utilities, those sorts of things, that needs to become a commodity. That process, I think, is going to be extremely painful. Alex Russell, who may or may not be in here, will tell me that it can't be done. He might be right, but I think that the core needs to become a commodity. We need to agree that, years later, we have figured out how we select DOM elements. We have figured out how we iterate over arrays. Now, of course, JS Next has figured these things out, but the fact is normal people are still developing with the old IEs, and they will be for a long time. As a community, we can't, I think that if we wait for the browsers to give us the tools that we need, we are just going to be on hold until sometime a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, I don't know. We're, as a community, and especially as the larger community of everyday users, we're going to be on hold. So number one, the core needs to become a commodity. That means that we need to figure out what are the APIs for doing these simple things that we always need to do. And there can be different implementations of those APIs, and that's fine, but we need to agree these are the APIs, and you can pick and choose. You can get your DOM stuff from jQuery, you can get your XHR from Dojo, and you can get your array manipulation from YUI if you want to. And Andrew DuPont did a great job. He told me not to say any more nice things about him, but I'm still going to do it. He's giving me a dirty look. Andrew DuPont did a great job talking about a specific example of this in function prototype bind. We know that that is going to be how it is, and it's time for libraries to think about adopting that, even if it means breaking backwards compatibility, because that is where we are headed, and that sort of functionality needs to become a commodity, not a branded feature. Number two, we need a standardized module system so that when one library provides a DOM utility, and one library provides an XHR utility, and one library provides event utility, we can cherry pick the pieces that we want. We can start to build best-of-breed solutions instead of being locked into a single vendor for our entire JavaScript application. And again, we can't wait for browsers to do this for us. I'm really excited about what Mozilla was talking, the Mozilla Dave Herman. I'm excited about what he was talking about today. that is not going to happen soon enough. We need to start demanding this now, and we need to start figuring this out now. Until this exists, we are going to be locked into these silos of libraries, these silos of tools, or we're going to be stuck figuring it out ourselves if we roll our own solutions. I'm really excited about AMD. I'm really excited that Dojo has embraced AMD. I hope other libraries are going to start to do the same. I had a great talk with Luke Smith yesterday about YUI's module system and how there may be a path for them to also embrace AMD. I want to see everybody just say, this is how we're going to do it. Is it perfect? I don't know. But until we figure this out, we are stuck in these silos, or we are stuck in these roll your own situations. Number 3, and kind of a part of the module problem, is library agnostic dependency management. This needs to be a huge priority for us so that we can start mixing and matching. We, again, need to agree this is how we will start requiring things. And it's kind of an embarrassment to the language, no offense to Brendan, that 15 years later, many people are still managing their JavaScript dependencies through script tags. That is not a 15-year-old answer to the dependency management problem, and yet it is, in many ways, the best answer that a lot of people have come up with. So we need to start seeing stuff like this. Right now, if you use underscore and you use jQuery, then you have huge duplication as far as the array utilities in them. And that sort of problem happens with lots of combinations where these micro-libraries are great, but if there's duplication of core functionality in them, then those are bytes that we're sending over the wire that we don't need to send. So we need to start prioritizing breaking things into the smallest rational piece. The signpost part is pretty easy, I think. The signposts, they took the guesswork out of navigating across the country. They made it so that you knew where to go, you knew which way to turn. When you got to an intersection, you knew where you were going, which was not a thing that you knew before the Lincoln Highway came along. It was kind of, you asked the farmer, and maybe you tore down the farmer's fence to get across his land. I said this in my modern JavaScript post, and I just want to say it again, that God bless everyone who's working on making the next script loader because we don't have enough, and the next templating engine because we don't have enough, and the next array utilities tool because we don't have enough. But all these things in the world, I'm so glad I'm not really glad that you're writing them, I'll be honest. I want to see smart people, the people who are smart enough to write these tools, explaining to other people how and why to use these tools, and working to improve the existing tools. I think that it is a position of chutzpah. How do I say that? Can you say it, Adam? Chutzpah. To say that I can do this better than someone else who has done it before and who has thought about it before and who has closed 50 bugs on their own project about this thing that you're just starting to think about. I want to see more education. Education is the signposts of this problem, is letting people who don't get to come to these conferences understand why these things are important and how to use them. I think it's something that we're struggling with. It's hard to create sufficiently complex examples that are sufficiently simple to understand. I think as a community we need to work on that and start putting up these signposts so that people can know which way to turn. Seedling Miles, so we talked about what those were as far as the Lincoln Highway. Again, I think that it's education and demos. I also think it's users demanding from libraries this intentional operability, this intentional interoperability. That looks so good on screen, and it's really hard to say. Pressuring libraries the libraries are the people who say that, those fancy cars are going to scare the horses. We need to be, as a community, saying, I demand this interoperability. We've seen some good examples of it already. I think that libraries are naturally hesitant about this because there will be winners and losers. Some libraries, DOM manipulation tools may win, and some libraries, event system may win. It is going to lead to fragmentation, but it's also going to lead to us coalescing around a best-of-breed solution. Right now, there are a lot of social rewards for releasing new things. you release a new script loader, you're on Hacker News. You release a new templating engine, you're on Hacker News. So there's a lot of rewards right now, and I think the rewards are a little bit misaligned. We need to somehow, I don't know how, we need to find ways to reward the people who are doing the grunt work of closing the tickets and fixing the bugs and improving existing solutions. And I do think that a lot of this is going to be up to users to not flock to the shiny new thing, but to respect the work that has been done. And I'm not saying that there's not a need for new solutions, there's not a need for new tools. There's always, God bless the people who are doing good thinking in those areas. But I think that we've shifted we're very much on that side of the pendulum swing, and it's important that we come back a little bit and start educating people how to use these tools and improving the existing tools. We have seen some good examples of this. Promises landing in jQuery was pretty exciting for me because in theory, it was sort of the first demonstration of the theory that you could make an XHR request with jQuery and hand it off to something that understands the promises A, B, J, I don't remember. Hand it off to something that understands the promises API that doesn't have to be jQuery. That was a huge and exciting thing. I want to see more of that. Dojo just spent a huge portion of their 1.6 release changing their Digit and Dojo modules over to AMD modules from their own custom dependency management system. That's also really exciting. Uber.js is another project that is kind of working on coming up with common solutions, canonical solutions to these problems that they're solved. They're solved problems. We don't need to solve them over and over again. I already kind of touched on this. Don't be Denver. And I think that it needs to be okay for people to say, don't be Denver. So Denver and towns all across the country, when they were planning the route for this highway across the country, they wanted to be on it. Now you get pissed when a highway comes through your town, but back then that was the most exciting thing that was happening once people kind of got on board with it, was they wanted to be on this highway because it was, especially in the rural West, this was going to be their salvation, to be on this highway. Turns out all they have is a bunch of McDonald's now, but so Denver, once this route was announced, Denver said, officially, we're not on the route, but we're going to put up signs saying that we are. And the Lincoln Highway Association had to have a special line in their guidebook that said, when you get to Denver, or when you get near Denver, keep going straight. They're lying. And again, this is a tough thing. I don't want to say all fragmentation is terrible, but I do think that as a community, we need to think about how do we get on a common path? Is there some common path that we can arrive at? And I think it needs to be okay when skeptics say, this is not helping us move forward. This is diverting us from the true task here. I think that as a community, there can be a lot of heated discussions when skeptics say, I'm not so sure this is the hot new thing. I think we need to embrace those skeptics a little bit more and welcome those conversations. The skeptics may be wrong, the skeptics may be right, but we need to welcome those conversations and appreciate them as part of the larger conversation we're having about how to get where we're trying to go. So it's up to users to ask, is it designed well to play with others? What does this solve that hasn't already been solved? Why is it better to use this than to work with something that already exists and has a legacy of community and bugs and all of that? And does the author know what they don't know? Does the author even realize what problems they haven't even thought of because they just released this last week versus the lifetime, a tool that has been around for years and years? So, modern JavaScript, we need to figure out what the path is. We need to put up signposts. We need to plant these seedling miles. And let's build it before we're too old to enjoy it.